When we think of ancient civilizations, we often imagine majestic temples, bustling markets, and kings in golden crowns. But hidden in the shadows of their glory lay punishments so bizarre, so terrifying, that they still chill us today. In a world where order had to be kept with iron hands, laws were enforced through fear, and justice often walked hand in hand with cruelty. Imagine standing in a crowded square of Mesopotamia, the heat of the sun pressing down as a crier reads aloud the punishments carved in Hammurabi's code. An eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. It was more than a saying, it was lived reality. If a builder's house collapsed and killed the owner, the builder himself could be executed. If a son struck his father, his hands might be cut off. Justice was not measured in mercy but in balance, carved literally into the flesh of the guilty. The crowd watched not only to witness the penalty but to learn, to feel fear, to remember the weight of the law. In ancient Egypt, the golden land of pharaohs and gods, punishments carried both earthly and divine meaning. For thieves, amputation was common, hands or noses removed to mark them forever as criminals. Some were forced into hard labor in the blazing desert quarries, where the heat alone was a punishment few survived. More sinister still were trials by ordeal. A man accused of lying might be made to drink poisoned water, the outcome left to the gods. If he survived, he was declared innocent, if not, justice had been served. Picture the trembling accused lifting the cup, surrounded by priests in white linen, the judgment of both humans and gods resting in the bitter liquid. For crimes against the pharaoh, punishments could be harsher still, for to defy the ruler was to defy the gods themselves. Rebels might be burned alive, drowned in the Nile, or even erased from history, their names chiseled out from monuments as though they had never existed. In Egypt, death was feared. But being forgotten was worse. Far to the east, in ancient China, punishment took on forms both elaborate and terrifying. The law, deeply rooted in the philosophy of order and obedience, demanded that the guilty suffer in ways that would deter all who watched. Public humiliation was common, criminals paraded through the streets with wooden cangs around their necks, heavy frames that cut into the skin and prevented sleep. Others faced caning so severe it broke bones, or exile to remote lands where survival was unlikely. But the most infamous punishments were reserved for grave crimes. Some offenders were sentenced to the death of 1,000 cuts. A slow execution meant not only to kill but to strip dignity from the condemned, body sliced piece by piece while the crowd shuddered in horror. Even lesser penalties reflected the power of the state, tattoos carved into the skin, branding criminals for life as living warnings. In such a world, punishment was not simply about one man's guilt, but about teaching the entire community that order could never be broken without pain. And in Greece, the birthplace of democracy, punishments revealed a paradox. Citizens could debate in open forums, yet those who threatened the order of the city faced exile or death. Ostracism, one of their strangest penalties, involved the citizens writing a man's name on shards of pottery. If enough people voted, he was banished for 10 years, not for any single crime but for the danger his influence posed. Imagine the weight of seeing your name scratched on hundreds of broken pots, realizing that your city, your neighbors, your friends had cast you out. Others faced more brutal ends. Thieves could be flogged, enslaved, or thrown into prison, while traitors might be forced to drink hemlock, as the philosopher Socrates did. Justice in Greece was sometimes lofty and philosophical, but at other times, it was swift, humiliating, and final. Across these civilizations, punishment was never hidden in courtrooms or prisons. It was public, ritualistic, and meant to scar the memory of everyone who saw it. The strange punishments of the ancient world were not just about controlling crime, they were about teaching obedience, showing the weight of law, and reminding each citizen of their place in the grand order of life. The Romans, masters of empire and law, brought their own terrifying stage to the world of punishment. To them, justice was not only about balance but about spectacle. In great amphitheaters, where thousands gathered for entertainment, punishments were woven into the games themselves. Criminals and slaves might be thrown to wild beasts, their screams echoing under the roar of the crowd. Others were forced into gladiatorial combat, armed with little more than desperation, their blood feeding the thirst of the masses. Crucifixion became one of Rome's most infamous penalties, a slow, agonizing death stretched out under the burning sun, designed to break not just the body but the spirit. Victims were nailed to wooden crosses, left exposed for days, serving as warnings to all who passed. For lesser crimes, Roman punishment still carried brutality, branding, flogging, or being sent to the mines, where prisoners often perished from exhaustion and cruelty. The empire's strength was built not only on discipline but on fear, and their punishments made that fear unforgettable. Further west, among the Aztecs of Mesoamerica, punishments were deeply tied to their spiritual beliefs. To them, crime disrupted the harmony of the gods, and punishment was a form of sacred restoration. Thieves might be enslaved, their bodies marked forever as property of another. Drunkenness, especially among the young, was punished with severity, sometimes even death, since self-control was a virtue tied to cosmic order. Adulterers could be stoned, their bodies buried under the weight of the community's judgment. Yet the strangest punishments reflected ritual sacrifice. Some offenders were chosen to die in ceremonies meant to honor the gods, their deaths transforming crime into sacred offering. Imagine a vast temple pyramid, drums beating as the condemned are led to the altar, the air thick with incense and dread. To the Aztecs, such acts were not mere executions, they were cosmic necessities, reminders that human life was bound to divine will. In the harsh lands of the Vikings, punishments carried a brutal simplicity. Theft or betrayal could be met with outlawry, a sentence as chilling as death itself. To be outlawed was to be stripped of all protection under the law, cast from the community, and left to wander alone. Anyone could kill you without consequence, and few survived long in exile. More gruesome still was the infamous blood eagle, a ritual execution said to be reserved for traitors. Victims were bound, their ribs split open, and lungs pulled out to resemble wings, their bodies offered as both punishment and spectacle. Whether this was myth or reality, its very existence in legend reflected the Viking belief in punishment as both fearsome and unforgettable. In a society that prized honor and loyalty, betrayal demanded a price so steep that even stories of it struck terror in generations to come. Meanwhile, in India, ancient texts such as the laws of Manu prescribed punishments that were both symbolic and cruel. The caste of the offender determined the severity of the penalty. A highborn might be fined, while a lowborn could face mutilation for the same crime. Thieves sometimes had their fingers cut off, while liars could have their tongues burned with hot iron. Public shaming was common, with offenders paraded through villages in humiliating displays. At times, punishments took on spiritual tones. Wrongdoers forced to lie on beds of nails, or to stand in water under the blazing sun, as though purification could be found in suffering. For the people of India, punishment was not only about the body but about the soul, binding earthly justice with divine order. From Rome to the Aztecs, from the Vikings to India, punishments revealed not only cruelty but a culture's deepest values. They showed what societies feared, what they cherished, and how they believed order should be preserved. To watch a man crucified, or an adulterer stoned, or an outlaw wandering alone was to see more than violence, it was to see the living embodiment of a civilization's belief in justice, however strange it might seem today. In medieval Europe, punishments took on an even stranger and more theatrical character, blending law, religion, and raw spectacle into a single chilling performance. The town square became the stage, where justice was not whispered in courts but shouted before the crowd. Stocks and pillories were common, trapping offenders by the neck and wrists while villagers hurled rotten food, mud, or insults at their helpless faces. Humiliation was considered as powerful a deterrent as pain. Yet for graver crimes, the punishments grew darker. Thieves might be hanged from gallows that loomed over village roads, their bodies left swaying as warnings to all who passed. Witches, or those accused of sorcery, often faced the flames, their screams rising with the crackling of fire, as priests proclaimed their souls cleansed in the smoke. Trial by ordeal was widespread. A man might be ordered to grasp a red-hot iron or plunge his arm into boiling water, his innocence proven only if the wounds healed clean. To live under such a system was to know that justice could be as merciless as the crime itself. Other punishments bordered on the surreal. Some towns devised bizarre contraptions such as the drunkard's cloak, a heavy barrel worn around the body, forcing the guilty to stumble through the streets in shame. Gossiping women might be strapped into scolds' bridles, iron masks with spikes that pierced the tongue to prevent speech. Bakers who cheated customers could be tied to their own carts and dragged through town, while coin forgers were sometimes boiled alive in molten metal, the very element they had dared to corrupt. Public executions drew massive crowds, where hangmen became grim performers and every death a cautionary tale. The cruelty was not random. It was ritualized, woven into the rhythm of medieval life, where punishment itself was seen as part of divine justice. And yet, across all these civilizations, from the laws of Hammurabi to the crucifixions of Rome, from the sacrifices of the Aztecs to the witch trials of Europe, punishments shared a common truth: they were about control as much as they were about crime. Strange and brutal though they seem to us, they reflected the values and fears of their time. In places where honor mattered most, punishments attacked dignity. Where religion ruled, punishments purified the soul through pain. Where rulers demanded obedience, punishments broke the body to preserve order. Each act of cruelty was not only about the condemned but about the crowd watching, learning, and trembling. As centuries passed and societies changed, many of these punishments were abandoned, remembered only in chronicles, legends, and the scars they left behind. But they remind us of a stark reality, that justice has not always meant fairness, and order has not always meant mercy. The strange punishments of ancient civilizations stand as haunting echoes of the past, showing us how far humanity has come, and how fragile the line is between discipline and cruelty. To look back at them is to see not only the darkness of history but the enduring human needs to define justice, even when it demanded a price written in blood, pain, or shame.